Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Erev Shabbos. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? And thank you for being patient. I'll explain in a moment everything else that's going on. But on top of all the excitement going on around here, when I was going to be on time, and then just one of the little technical glitches, the same thing we do every day, but it wasn't reading whatever, the computer card in the camera. Okay. Guy in Ohio, Lucy in Minnesota, Yehudit in South Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bella in Florida, Gordo in Scotland. Must be Friday. Good to see you, Gordo. John in Maine, Joseph in Nevada, Melissa in Great Neck. Joseph saying, where can we see guns and Moses? I'll talk about that in a moment. Lorraine in Texas, Augusto in Florida, right? Bianca in Austin, Texas. Nina answering the question in the comments. Guns in Chaim in Florida, Aoife in Florida, Ella in Southern California. Welcome, everybody. Yes, Guns N' Moses opens July 18th in theaters across America. The big excitement this morning is that we are going to drop the official trailer on Monday, and there was all kinds of stuff going on around that. And our publicity team was working hard to get coverage of the trailer drop. And what they were hoping for was to get the Hollywood Reporter to do an exclusive, not just about the trailer, but a little bit of the context of the movie. I mean, what could be more timely than a movie about Jews under attack who fight back? And the unexpected bond that forms between Rabbi Mo, the Hasidic rabbi at the center of the story, played by Mark Feuerstein, and an anti-Semite. A young man, who's been radicalized online and taught to hate Jews that he's basically never met. And then when he actually does meet Rabbi Mo, who is the only person who thinks he's innocent in the story, and Rabbi Mo's pursuit of truth ends up, bringing these two guys together. And is so often the case, around the world, we see this, that people start hating other people that they've only heard about and never met. And if they would break bread together, if they would actually come face to face, things could change. I mean, that's what the movie's about. The trailer was supposed to drop Monday. The Hollywood Reporter got wind of it and said, yeah, we'll cover that. We'll do an exclusive article about it. But we don't want to wait till Monday. So they dropped it immediately. The trailer was unlisted on YouTube. We had to make it public, do a premiere, notify all the actors, all the talent, everybody. So we've just been in massive scramble mode this morning. But it's so often when God arranges things for you, it's not on your schedule, and it could all happen in the blink of an eye, as the Talmud teaches us. Which is to say, I'm going to just come very clean. I really never do this. But I did not prepare. I did not prepare the daf today. I have not read the page that we are about to learn together. I always, even if I have very little time, I get in there and see what's going on and absorb as much as I can. Usually I spend an hour preparing to teach the class if I can. But so much happened this morning, and we were already in the midst, we're buying billboards, we're arranging wild posting in other cities. It just never ends. Writing an op-ed that's going to be published. And Nina and I are just at the heart of it. There's so many decisions and choices that we have to make every day. Right now, this period, this month leading up until July 18th is very much like production, but I've insisted that I'm going to keep teaching the class, even though it's like a production schedule. Nonetheless, today, so much happened that I just confess, I haven't read this page. So let's learn it together. And I'll do my best. And if I sound unprepared, it's because I am. And I hope that you, please forgive me. And please, God, forgive me. It's just not the way I would do things. but this morning was insane. Okay, we are opening chapter 7 here in Tractate Shevuos, the 26th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of oaths. As we move into chapter 7, we're going to be focusing on Exodus 22:10. The oath of the Lord shall be between them to see whether he has not put his hand on his neighbor's goods. And the owner thereof shall accept it, and he shall not make restitution. So here's the concept, basically, of the oath of deposit, that if you were charged with something and through no fault of your own, it was lost, right? It was, if you're an unpaid bailee and it was lost, or you're a paid bailee and you were robbed by armed robbers. So you're not going to be liable in that situation, but there were no witnesses to prove that it is truly not your responsibility. So you're going to swear the oath. And if you swear the oath, then you won't have to pay. Right? We do not find this in American law. Like, either you're liable or you're not. Just saying that I swear this is what happened is not going to be enough to excuse liability. And so this assumes a pious population and people that are not going to swear cavalierly, casually, with no love and especially awe of our Creator. So in that context, Mishnah number 1 of chapter 7. All those who take an oath that is legislated by the Torah take an oath and do not pay. By Torah law, one takes an oath only in order to exempt himself from a monetary claim. And these litigants take a rabbinically instituted oath and receive possession of the disputed funds or property, i.e., their claim is upheld by means of the oath, even though they are not in possession of the property in question. Right, so this is now the rabbinically instituted oath, a little bit different than the oath of deposit. They don't have the goods in question, but they are able to swear the oath. And who are we talking about? A hired worker who claims that he has not received his wages. This is going to be by rabbinic, right? By rabbinic law. And one who was robbed and sues the person who robbed him. And one who was injured and who claims compensation from the person who injured him. And one whose opposing litigant is suspect with regard to the taking of an oath. And so we're going to transfer the oath to the one who is not suspected of lying. Normally the defendant would take the oath of deposit. But since he's suspected of lying when he takes oaths, we would switch that onus onto the plaintiff. And if he's willing to swear that, hey, you owe me, then the court is going to believe him and going to take the money from the defendant. Right? When a person who is suspected of taking false oaths is liable to take an oath in order to exempt himself, the claimant takes the oath instead and receives payment. And the other person in this group is a storekeeper, relying on his ledger, also takes an oath and is paid, because we assume that his records are good. In the absence of other evidence, we're going to believe the storekeeper if he's willing to take an oath. How does this law apply to the hired worker? The case is where one says to his employer, "Give me my wages that are still in your possession," meaning they're my wages, you haven't paid me yet. That's why we say they're my wages still in your possession. The employer says, "I already gave them to you." And that worker says, "I have not received them," right? So he said, we don't have witnesses, we can't establish it. The employee says, "I haven't been paid." The employer says, "I have paid." Okay, what are we going to do here? This is a good case to use the oath. Who's going to swear the oath? The one who wants to get paid, right? The employee. You might have thought that it's the employer who says, "I already paid you," that swears the oath. But if that were so, he also would not be holding the money, because he would be claiming that the employee already received it. So it's the rabbis who step in and say the employee will swear the oath and then he gets paid, right? "Give me my wages that are still in your possession." The employer says, "I already gave them to you." And that worker says, "I have not received them." In such a case, the worker takes an oath that he has not received his wages, and he receives payment from his employer. Rabbi Yehuda says this oath cannot be administered unless there is partial admission on the part of the employer. Partial admission takes us right back into Torah law and the oath of deposit, where they're disagreeing not on the fact that a debt is owed, but how much is owed. Right? So if the employee says, well, you paid me, but you owed me $100 and you only gave me $20 of it, and the employer says, I paid you and I gave you all of it, right now they're talking about a discrepancy in the amount that is owed and paid. This is partial admission, and it would make sense to do an oath of deposit. How so? In terms of what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, the case is where the worker said to him, give me my wages, 50 silver dinars, which are still in your possession. The employer says, you have already received 1 golden dinar, which is worth 25 silver dinars. Since the employer has admitted that he owes part of the sum, the worker takes an oath and is paid the whole sum. How does this law apply to one who was robbed? The case is where the witnesses testified about the defendant that he entered the claimant's house to seize collateral from him without the authority to do so. And the claimant said, you took items that belonged to me. And the defendant says, I did not take them. So the claimant takes an oath and receives payment of his claim. Rabbi Yehuda says this oath cannot be administered unless there is partial admission on the part of the defendant. How so? The case is where the claimant said to him, you took 2 items, and he says, I took only 1. Since the defendant admits that he took 1 item from the house, the claimant takes an oath and receives payment of his whole claim. How does this law apply to one who was injured? The case is where witnesses testified about the injured person that he entered into the domain of the defendant whole, but he left injured. I mean, he was healthy and whole when he entered, but he was injured when he left. The witnesses didn't see the injury, but they saw that this person went into the domain of the defendant, and the plaintiff at that time was healthy, and when he went out, he was injured, right? So presumably some kind of negligence or some kind of intentional injury happened in the domain of the defendant. So the witnesses say that he went in whole, came out injured, and the claimant said to the defendant, you injured me. And the defendant says, I did not injure you. The injured party takes an oath and receives compensation. Rabbi Yehuda says this oath cannot be administered unless there is partial admission. How so? The case is where the claimant said to the defendant, you injured me twice. And the other one says, I injured you only once. In such a case, the injured party takes a note that he was injured twice and receives compensation for both injuries. How does this law apply to one whose opposing litigant is suspect with regard to the taking of an oath and therefore is not permitted to take an oath? Now we're on page 45a. One is considered suspect with regard to oaths if he has been found to have taken a false oath, whether it was an oath of testimony, somebody who says, I can't be a witness in your case because I don't know anything about it, and then it turns out that he did. Or whether it was an oath on a deposit. For example, someone who says, the plaintiff claims, you owe me $100 that I deposited in your care. And this guy says, I swear that I don't have your money. And then it turns out that he does. That would be a false oath of deposit. Or even an oath taken in vain. An oath taken in vain, which we said is somebody who says, that he swears before God that the moon is made of green cheese and that everyone knows is false. That would be an oath taken in vain. And now we're saying this is somebody who is casual with oaths, and he would say and swears falsely in front of everybody. We're not going to believe him when he's swearing about something important. And even though that one who takes an oath in vain is a less severe prohibition, he has violated a less severe prohibition than a false oath of testimony or false oath of deposit. Now, there are also categories of people who by rabbinic decree are considered suspect with regard to oaths. If one of the litigants was a dice player, right? We've talked about professional gamblers are not qualified to give witness testimony in a beis din, in a rabbinic court, because they make a living from gambling in which people really haven't. It's a very interesting ruling, right? Because you would think, well, anyone who sits down to gamble knows that he can lose. But the professional gambler is constantly sitting down with people that think they're going to win. He beats them, and so he's taking money that they didn't really consent to lose, and that's what he's making a livelihood from. So this is considered a person who is not credible. Or one who lends with interest. Okay, so that's obviously violating a big prohibition. Jews may not lend to each other money at interest. Or among those who fly pigeons, another kind of gambler. Or among the vendors of produce of the sabbatical year, violating the laws of Shemitah. In these cases, since these people are not deemed credible, if a litigant is opposing them in court, he takes the oath and receives payment of his claim, even though normally in that situation, it would be the other one who takes the oath, but we don't believe that person when he takes an oath. If both litigants were suspect, then the oath returned to its place. This is the statement of Rabbi Yosef, and will be explained in the Gemara. Rabbi Meir says, since neither can take an oath, they divide the disputed amount. And how does this law apply to the storekeeper who relies on his ledger? This ruling is not referring to the case where a storekeeper says to a customer, it is written in my ledger that you owe me 200 dinars. That's what we might have thought. Rather, it is referring to a case where a customer says to a storekeeper, give my son 2 sa of wheat, or give my laborers a sela in small coins. And the storekeeper says, I gave it to them. But they say, we did not receive it. In such a case where the father or employer admits that he gave those instructions and it is also recorded in the storekeeper's ledger, the storekeeper takes an oath that he gave the son the wheat or paid the laborers, and he receives compensation from the father or employer. And the laborers take an oath that they were not paid and they receive their wages from the employer. Right? So it's not that the storekeeper writes down, who took produce and said they put it on my tab and that they would pay later and they haven't paid yet. That's actually not the case, right? It's where the storekeeper is acting as a kind of local bank, paying, somebody owes him, he pays somebody else. Now he says, compensate me. It's a little bit more intricate. And we're saying that the storekeeper is the one who takes careful records, and where communication could be lost, and the father told his son to go pick up at the store, and the son says, I didn't receive, and the storekeeper says, I did give it to him, right? It's like a little bit more involved. There, we're going to believe the storekeeper who keeps careful records of everything that goes on in his store, and that, coupled with him being willing to swear an oath to it, is going to win the day in the Beis Din. Ben Nanas said, how is it that both these and those come to take an oath in vain? One of them is certainly lying if you have two people who are swearing against each other. So rather, the storekeeper receives his compensation without taking an oath, and the laborers receive their wages without taking an oath, right? If you had two sides of an equation, two sides of this, kind of, we're going to come back to it, but this kind of complicated arrangement where oaths are being taken that contradict each other, well, then we would know that one of the oaths was taken in vain. So we can't create that kind of a situation, and so we're going to make sure not to, where there would be two oaths sworn. It's not that, because it's not plaintiff versus defendant, right? It's the father saying about the shopkeeper and the shopkeeper talking about the laborer, because there's three parties involved. That could theoretically happen, and we don't want that to happen because then somebody would have sworn in vain, even if he was doing it by mistake. Okay, new subject, even though we're still in the Mishna. If one said to a storekeeper, it's quite a long Mishnah. If one said to a storekeeper, give me produce valued at a dinar, and he gave him the produce. And later the storekeeper said to him, give me that dinar that you owe me. And the customer said to him, I gave it to you, and you put it in your wallet. And the customer, in this case, the customer shall take an oath that he gave him the dinar. If, after he gave the storekeeper the money, the customer said to him, give me the produce. And the storekeeper said to him, I gave it to you, and you transported it to your house. So the storekeeper shall take an oath that he has already filled the order, and he is exempt from supplying the produce. Rabbi Yehuda says whoever has the produce in his possession has the advantage, and his claim is accepted without his taking an oath. A little bit of the possession is 9/10 of the law. He has the advantage because whatever he's saying, he knows is true, right? Other claims about stuff that is not present is where we're, are we going to take someone's word for it or not? Are we going to accept the oath or not? Similarly, let's go slow. If one said to a money changer, right, what's normally a money changer? Normally, it's your, I have Syrian dinars and I need Jerusalem shekels so that, I've traveled down for the pilgrimage festival and it's somebody, is exchanging different kinds of money. There were many different kinds of money in that region. It's interesting, right? Israel has always been the crossroads of the world, and pilgrims are coming from so many different places, and so they're bringing money from other places that may or may not be accepted locally. So the money changer, for a small fee, is going to change one kind of money to another that the person can spend. The money changer can later use that money and go somewhere else, redeem its value. It's foreign exchange. That's how they make money. Okay. They also happen to have a lot of money lying around. So if you needed, even within the same kind of currency, to change large bills for small bills, or golden dinars for silver shekels, etc., the money changer could do that. Okay, let's go on. If one said to a money changer, "Give me small coins valued at a dinar," and he gave him the coins, and consequently the money changer said to him, "Give me the dinar," right? So I have a gold dinar, whatever. Do you remember what a gold dinar was worth? It was at the beginning of chapter 6. They had that nice little chart. So we can review that for a second, right? So a gold dinar has a value of 25 silver dinars. And a silver dinar has a value of 192 perutas. Okay, so a gold dinar is worth quite a bit. And then a shekel, let's say there's 2 shekels in a silver dinar. And so it's about 1/12. A shekel is about 1/12 of a gold dinar. All right, the point is a gold dinar is a large denomination coin, and now he wants smaller coins so that he can, go buy bread and groceries. Okay, you don't want to spend that gold dinar. So he says, "Give me small coins for my gold dinar." The money changer says, "Okay, here's the small coins, 1 dinar's worth. Now give me the dinar." And this guy says, "I already gave you the dinar." Right, so you can see how this conflict could come up. Either somebody was forgetful, or he put the gold dinar on the table, some thief came by and took it. So the money changer says, "I didn't receive the gold dinar." The guy says, "I gave it to you." They don't know, maybe perhaps that a thief came by. Who knows what happened? Or maybe it got swept off the table. The fact is, the money changer is sure he didn't receive it, and the customer is sure he did give it. So what are we going to do? He says, "Give me the dinar." And the customer said to him, "I already gave it to you, and you put it in your wallet." So in this case, the customer shall take an oath that he paid. If the customer gave the money changer the dinar and then said to him, "Give me the coins," and the money changer said to him, "I already gave you the coins and you put them in your purse," the money changer then shall be the one who takes the oath. So Rabbi Yehuda says it is not a money changer's way to give even an isar until he receives a dinar. Therefore, the fact that the customer received the coins indicates that the money changer already received his payment. Now, new subject. These cases of taking an oath are just like other cases where the sages said that one takes an oath and receives payment. The Mishna, Tractate Shevuos, page 87a, teaches a woman who vitiates her marriage contract, her ketubah, by acknowledging receipt of partial payment, may collect the remainder only by taking an oath, or if one witness testifies that her marriage contract has been paid, she may collect it only by taking an oath. Right? So the ketubah, when does that get paid? So a woman received the ketubah when she got married, and it says that if her husband divorces her or predeceases her, if she becomes a widow or a divorcee, the husband, if it's a divorce, or his estate, if she's widowed, has to pay the amount of money that was contractually agreed to in the ketubah. Where this conflict is going to come up is if she, if she was already paid some of it, but not all of it, and they claim we paid you all of it. And she says, I only received some of it, right? So that sounds like a situation where she swears the oath that I received some, but not all, because she partially admits. If she was saying I received none of it, and they say you received all of it, then that would not be an oath situation. We would look to witnesses. We would look to more. On the other hand, widow is somebody who really needs that money in order to live. So we have a policy consideration where we want to make sure she's able to get it. Now, let's go back and read this again. This is about a woman who vitiates her marriage contract. So she is admitting that she receives some, but not all. Vitiates, right, meaning she's reducing by her own admission the amount that she is to receive because she already received some of it. A woman who vitiates her marriage contract by acknowledging receipt of a partial payment may collect the remainder only by taking an oath. She has to swear how much she has received and how much she is still owed. She can't just claim, hey, give me the rest of what you owe me, without swearing that oath. So now a different case, if one witness comes, now we've seen that one witness can be used for certain things, like getting someone to swear an oath in a situation where two witnesses would have led them to have to pay. Or if one witness testifies that her marriage contract has been paid, so that's not going to be enough. If there were two witnesses saying she had been paid, well, then the estate, or the husband in the case of divorce, is off the hook because she's paid, and we've established it by the testimony of two witnesses. But we only have one witness. That's enough to make her swear. But if she does swear, she gets paid. Or if one witness testifies that her marriage contract has been paid, she may collect it only by taking an oath. She may collect it from liened property that has been sold to a third party, right? Because a husband has an absolute obligation to pay what is owed in the ketubah. And so if he sold property and then divorces her and there's no way to pay it, but she had a lien on that property, so she's actually going to be able to go and get it from the person who purchased it from her husband, and then that person will have recourse to the husband. But she has a prior lien for the purposes of paying her ketubah on any property that the husband had. She may collect it from lien property that has been sold to a third party or from the property of orphans, but only by taking an oath. And a woman who collects it from her husband's property when not in his presence may collect it only by taking an oath. And likewise, orphans may collect a loan with a promissory note inherited from their father only by taking an oath. Orphans who wish to collect payment of money owed to their father must take the following oath. On our oath, our father did not direct us on his deathbed not to collect with this promissory note, and our father did not say to us that this note was paid, and we did not find among our father's documents a record showing that this promissory note was paid. Right? Because any of those things would obviously mean that, well, there might have been a promissory note among the father's goods that they inherited, but if he instructed them on his deathbed, you know what, I already was paid back. That promissory note, I should have ripped it up and I forgot to. Don't collect on it. Or if they found a receipt showing that hadn't been delivered yet, let's say to the borrower, but it was drawn up as if it should have been delivered, and which would be indicative of the fact that even though the promissory note is still in the estate of the father, he had been paid, right? So they're swearing a note that none of those things had happened. After taking that oath, they may collect the money. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says, even if the son was born after the father's death, he needs to take an oath in order to receive the money owed to his father. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, if there are witnesses that the father said at the time of his death, this promissory note has not been paid, the son collects the debt without having to take an oath. Another new subject, still in our Mishna, number 1 in chapter 7. And these people are sometimes required to take an oath that they do not owe anything, even when there is no explicit claim against them. Partners, sharecroppers, Stewards, a woman who does business from home, where she manages the property of orphans, and the member of the household appointed to manage the household's affairs. What are we talking about? For example, in a case where one of these people said to one of the people whose property he or she manages, "What is your claim against me?" If the other replied, "It is simply my wish that you take an oath to me that you have not taken anything of mine," the former is liable to take that oath. Interesting, right? So you have somebody who's, you are an absentee landowner, right? You have a summer place. In Talmudic times, it's not like you could just get in your car and drive 200 miles in a day and go to your summer place. That might have been a weeks-long journey, and you don't get around to it very often. Maybe years pass in between. But you have hired somebody over there to be the caretaker. And then when you finally come years later, and the place is seemingly in good shape, but you don't remember, what was the furniture and what were the items in the kitchen and in the bedroom of that house. And for some reason, something strikes you as fishy. There's something not here. It was there once. You remember using it in your summer place. It's not there now. It might be that you took it with you the last time you were there. You either sold it or lost it somewhere else, or you brought it back to your regular residence. You can't remember. And so now you say to this landlord, this manager, your property manager, "Swear to me that you didn't take it for yourself." Can you administer such an oath? Can you make that person swear? Is that really part of his job? He's getting paid. There's no reason to believe, there's no reason to suspect him that he's done something wrong. You have no basis to be suspect of him, to be suspicious of him. Can you impose that oath? Apparently, yes. Right? If the other replied, "It is simply my wish that you take an oath to me that you have not taken anything of mine," then the former, the property manager who says, what is your claim against me, is liable to take that oath. Once the partners or the sharecroppers have divided the common property, each taking his share, then one side may not require an oath of the other, absent a definite claim. But if an oath was imposed upon him due to some other situation, that oath can be extended to impose upon him any other oath, i.e., it can be extended to apply to any of their other disputes. And the Mishna adds, and the sabbatical year abrogates the obligation to take an oath about a debt, just like it abrogates the debt. That's the Mishna. Now let's get into the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches, all those who take an oath that is legislated by the Torah, take an oath and do not pay. So the Gemara asks, from where do we derive that oaths mandated by Torah law serve only to exempt one from payment? We derive it from the fact that the verse states, the oath of the Lord shall be between them both to see whether he has put his hand on his neighbor's goods, and its owner shall accept it, and he shall not make restitution because he swore the oath that he does not owe. According to the verse, with regard to he who would otherwise need to pay, it is on him that the obligation to take the oath is imposed, unless we transfer the oath to the other one, because the one who normally would have to take the oath is suspect of swearing falsely. New subject. The Mishnah teaches, and these litigants take an oath and receive possession of the disputed funds or property, and it lists a hired worker in that category. So the Gemara asks, what is different about a hired worker that the sages instituted for him, that he take an oath and receive his wages? So Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, great halachas were taught here. Right? He said, great halachas. All laws are important. All Torah laws are crucial. What does it mean that great halachas were taught here? Something impressed. Who are we talking about? Wait a minute. Shmuel, right? Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said. So what is it that impressed Shmuel so much about these particular laws? So the Gemara asks, halachas? Are these oaths actually halachas transmitted to Moses from Sinai, as is usually indicated by the use of the term halachas? They are instituted by rabbinic law. gezeras, right? A rabbinic decree. So rather say great gezeras were instituted here. Or in this case, takanos is the word that's being used in the Aramaic. But the point being, are you saying that great Torah laws were instituted here? Or are you saying that great rabbinic ordinances were instituted here? Sounds like you're talking about ordinances and calling them Torah laws. What's happening? The Gemara asks, since these ordinances are called great, can one conclude by inference that there are also minor ordinances? Are there rabbinic ordinances that are less important? Rather, Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says permanent ordinances were taught here. What does that mean? The sages uprooted the oath from the employer and imposed it upon the hired worker due to the fact that his wages are his livelihood. This is one of the very few situations, right, where the sages step in and change the way that a Torah law seemingly should be applied according to the explicit word of the Torah in order to satisfy a policy consideration that was evident in the society, and that if we applied the Torah law strictly as it was written, it would create this big inequitable outcome. So that's why he's saying great halachas were taught here, right? Kind of makes sense. But Rav Nachman words it as permanent ordinances were taught here. The sages uprooted the oath from the employer and imposed it upon the hired worker due to the fact that his wages are his livelihood. The Gemara asks, due to the need to protect the hired worker's livelihood, do we penalize the employer by leaving him vulnerable to a dishonest worker? Okay, workers need their wages in order to eat. Employers presumably are not so close to subsistence wage. But if we uproot a Torah law because of this policy consideration, don't we then subject the employer potentially to an abuse of the law by a dishonest hired worker? And the Gemara answers, the employer himself is amenable to the hired worker taking an oath and collecting his wages, so that laborers will accept employment from him. If the workers are not protected in this manner, they will be wary of accepting work. Additional policy considerations that they probably only figured out after they passed such ordinances and realized what the unintended consequences were. So the Gemara asks, on the contrary, isn't it preferable for the hired worker that in the case of a dispute between them, the employer takes the oath and is released from payment? He would agree to this arrangement in order to create conditions in which the employer will readily hire him. If employers are exposed to the risk of being cheated by dishonest workers, they will be wary of hiring. That's why it's good for the employees that the employers feel protected by the law. And the Gemara answers, the employer perforce hires workers since he needs the work done. And the Gemara asks, doesn't the hired worker also perforce accept employment since he needs it for his livelihood? Rather, the reason the worker takes the oath is that the employer is distracted with managing his laborers. So it is reasonable to assume that he forgot whether he paid one particular worker of the many, whereas the worker will not forget whether he was paid or not. And the Gemara raises a difficulty. But if it is presumed that the employer forgot to pay, let him give the wages to the worker without the worker taking an oath. And the Gemara explains the oath was instituted to alleviate the concerns of the employer, to ensure him that he is not being cheated. And why did the sages not institute that the employer should give the worker his wages in the presence of witnesses so that it could readily be established whether he was paid or not? And the Gemara answers, finding witnesses whenever he pays wages would be a burdensome matter for him. And why did the sages not institute that the employer should give him his wages at the outset, when he hires him, so that there would be no need for an oath? And the Gemara answers, they both want the work to be done on credit, i.e., before the wages are paid, as sometimes the employer has no money ready when he hires a worker, and the worker also prefers receiving his money at the end of the day. If so, then even with regard to the amount fixed as payment, the employer is apt to be forgetful. Why then is it taught in a baraisa? If the craftsman says, you fixed 2 coins as my payment, and the other, the employer, says, I fixed only 1 coin as your payment, the law is that the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. That's generally true. If whatever the situation is, if I'm saying you owe me money and you need to give me money, right, then I'm going to have to prove why you have to give me money. I'm the plaintiff, you're the defendant. I am claiming money from you. That's how we're using the term claimant, right? So generally speaking, if I'm trying to get money from you, I have the burden of proof to show why you owe me that money. It could be many, many different situations. We had a contract, you didn't pay me, I did work for you, you didn't pay me, you injured me, you haven't paid me. There's many situations that would require it, but normally speaking, I have the burden of proof if I'm the one trying to get the money. Ooh, where was I? Right. The burden of proof is, I'm sorry, let's just read the question again. If the craftsman says, you fixed 2 coins as my payment, and the other, the employer, says, I fixed only 1 coin as your payment, the law is that the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. Now, is that going to always work? The craftsman must bring witnesses to collect the additional sum. An oath is not sufficient. So why is it not assumed that the employer is distracted and the craftsman would be allowed to take an oath and collect the amount that he claims? And the Gemara answers, with regard to the fixing of wages, he certainly remembers. A hired worker is different than a craftsman. A craftsman would have a contract, right, with basically the client, right? It's really a client and craftsman relationship. It's not employer-employee. Employer-employee, they definitely fixed the wage at the outset. They agreed what the wage would be. And that is known, and that's why the employee can just swear an oath and collect. But the craftsman is not like an employee. You know, every job is different. The fixing of wages is not going to be so standardized, and they could have a discrepancy of what they agreed to, and that's why he's going to need witnesses in order to prove it. And in the absence of witnesses, it will not be sufficient for the craftsman to swear an oath about what he thought they agreed to, the way a hired worker could swear an oath. The Gemara asks, and we are on page 45b, if so, then even if the time the wages were due had passed, the worker should be able to prove that he has not been paid by taking an oath. Why then is it taught in a baraisa that if the established time for paying wages had passed, i.e. the night after the work was performed, and the employer had not given the worker his wages, he no longer can take an oath and receive his wages, but rather he must bring witnesses to prove that he was not yet paid. So interesting. There's a deadline for a hired worker swearing an oath that he was not paid, and that's enough for the sake of evidence to get him paid. But if the deadline passes, then he's going to be like any other claimant who has to bring witnesses, or he won't be paid. And the Gemara answers, there is a presumption that the employer will not violate the prohibition against delaying payment of wages that's written in the Torah, Leviticus 19:13. Right? You must a hired worker, you have to pay him his wage. And you should not let the sun set over that. And so therefore, it's, in addition to whether they're remembering properly or not, there's an additional provision in the Torah that protects hired workers. So the Gemara asks, but didn't you say that the employer is distracted with his laborers and he is apt to forget to pay? So how can you say he's never going to violate this law if you've already said that he can be forgetful and not pay? So the Gemara responds, this statement that he is presumed to be distracted applies only before the time arrives that he incurs liability for delaying payment of wages. When the time that he incurs liability arrives, he takes it upon himself to remember to pay. The Gemara asks, is the hired worker suspected of demanding his wages twice and violating the prohibition against robbery? And the Gemara answers, with regard to the employer, there are two presumptions supporting his claim that the wages were paid. One is that the employer will not violate the prohibition of delaying payment of wages, and the other is that a hired worker will not defer requesting his wages. Therefore, if he is requesting his wages after the deadline, he probably already received them, and he no longer can prove his claim with a mere oath. He'll have to actually bring evidence. If he's asking at the appropriate time, then we don't have that presumption working against the hired worker, and so he can swear an oath and get paid. New subject, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says, hold on, what's going on? This is the document by which I get questions from Nina, and it made me sign in again. Okay. Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says, the sages taught that a worker takes an oath and receives his wages only when the employer hired him in the presence of witnesses. But if he hired him not in the presence of witnesses, then since migo, we've talked about migo, since he could have made a more advantageous claim, that's the principle of migo, and said to him, I never hired you, he can instead say to him, I hired you, but I already gave you your wages. And that claim is accepted by the court. There's a principle in halacha that one is deemed credible when he makes a less advantageous claim than he could have made. And Rabbi Yitzchak said to Rav Nachman, that is correct. And so said Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara asks, can one infer from the fact that Rabbi Yitzchak said that it was specifically Rabbi Yochanan who says this, that Reish Lakish, who often engaged in disputes with Rabbi Yochanan, disagrees with him? And even though Rabbi Yitzchak did not report that he does, and some say that Reish Lakish was drinking at the time that Rabbi Yochanan made his statement and therefore was silent, and some say that he was waiting for him to complete his statement, and that's why he was silent, and it remains unclear whether he disagreed. We've covered this before. It was also stated that Rav Menashe Bar Zevid says that Rav says the sages taught that a worker takes an oath and receives his wages only when the employer hired him in the presence of witnesses. But if he hired him not in the presence of witnesses, since he could have said to him, I never hired you, he can instead say to him, I hired you, but I already gave you your wages, and that claim is accepted by the court. New subject. Rami Bar Chama said, how excellent is this halacha? Rav said to him, what is its excellence? If the halacha is so, how can you ever find an instance of the oath of the bailees concerning a deposit that the merciful one imposed? Since the bailee could say to the owner, these events never occurred, I never accepted a deposit from you, he can say to him the deposit was lost by accident. He will not need to take an oath to support his claim, since he would have been deemed credible without taking an oath if he had denied accepting the deposit at all. So Rami Bar Chama answered, the oath of the bailees, right? Somebody who was paid to guard something, and then he claims it was robbed, or somebody who was not a paid bailee, and he's just saying it's lost. I didn't steal it; it's gone. You didn't pay me, so the fact that it's lost excuses me from liability. But he has to swear to that, right? Now, what we're saying here is, but he could also claim, I never received it. There were no witnesses to that. Right? Since the claimant cannot prove that he ever actually gave the property to the bailee, the bailee, the alleged bailee, who says you never gave it to me, and it can't be proven otherwise, then he won't have to swear an oath. Since he acknowledges that he received it, then, and now it's lost, why does he have to swear? Can't we use the principle of migo to say he could have claimed he never got it? He acknowledged that he got it, but he says it's lost. Since he could have made a better argument and he didn't, an easier argument for him to win legally, and he didn't do that, why don't we just, as a court, believe him when he says it's lost and not impose an oath on him, right? That's what's being asked. So Rami Bar Chama answered, the oath of the bailees is still relevant where the owner deposited the item with him in the presence of witnesses. then he has to swear the oath. Rava retorts, even then, since he could say to him, I already returned it to you, and his claim would be accepted without his taking an oath, he can say to him the deposit was lost by accident, and his claim will be accepted without his taking an oath under the principle of migo. And Rami Bar Chama answered, the oath of the Baileys is still relevant where the owner deposited an item. The oath of the Baileys is still relevant where the owner deposited the item with him, with a document given as a receipt. Possession of the receipt serves as evidence that the Bailey has not returned the deposit. And the Gemara comments, by inference from their statements, one may conclude that both Rava and Rami Bar Chama hold that if one deposits an item with another person in the presence of witnesses, he does not need to return it to him in the presence of witnesses, and his claim that he returned it without witnesses is accepted. But if one deposits an item with another person with a document given as a receipt, he needs to return it to him in the presence of witnesses who can testify that it was returned. And that's where we'll knock off. I'm going to take some questions, but with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Motzi Shabbos. I think it's this Shabbos and next Shabbos, or maybe this is almost it, and next Shabbos is it, the latest Shabbos of the year in terms of when Shabbos ends. I think last week I was able to get on the air shortly before 10 p.m. Pacific. I'm always, as I tell you every Friday and Saturday, in awe of my East Coast people in our class who tune in at 1 a.m. to learn Talmud at the beginning of the week. You are heroes, and you're going to have a tremendous merit both in this world and in the world to come. Okay. Nina is reminding me that on Sunday, we're going to have to change the class time because we're supporting a friend whose one-man show is launching. And we're obligated. It's a very, very dear friend of ours. But we'll teach the class on Sunday. So usually when we can't do it at 6, we do it at noon Pacific. But I'll let you know Saturday night, and we'll post it on the Facebook page what time the class will be on Sunday. Questions. Joe, can't the property manager be considered a paid bailee? Yeah, right? Sounds like that's exactly what he is. But what's interesting is there's not a definite claim that this thing in my house is missing. Swear that you didn't, take it, right? Rather was like, just swear to me you didn't take anything. That's where you would think you could not impose that oath, but it seems that by rabbinic ordinance, you could. Joseph, how can we explain to those who suppose that rabbinical decrees and ordinances are additions to Torah that these laws are not additions to the Torah? Well, I would say that the Torah system of law that was given to us at Mount Sinai certainly included the concept that you shall listen to your elders in that time, right? In that generation. Because the Torah, which is a very terse document, simply could not cover all of the situations which would come up in a changing world over thousands of years. God knew that the world would keep changing. God knew 3,000 years ago that there would be AI and autonomous vehicles and airplanes and penicillin and all these things of the modern world. God knew that that was coming. We didn't. We didn't understand that he couldn't write about, is a person legally dead when, he's hooked up to a ventilator and his brain is operating at 60% electrical capacity. I'm just making all that up. But the point is, those kinds of questions, were obviously beyond the imagination of society 3,000 years ago. But there needed to be a system by which such questions could be answered under Torah law as society changed and those questions arose. And that's what the Talmud is. That's what the oral law is. Certain laws were given right at Mount Sinai, right? So where the Torah says you shall bind these words as a sign upon your hand, they shall be a symbol before your eyes. That's the commandment of tefillin. But nowhere in the Torah does it say that's a black box with black leather straps and these words printed on a scroll, handwritten on a scroll inside that you wear on your forehead and on your arm and wrap that strap. You wouldn't know that, right? So God established the system immediately at Mount Sinai that certain laws can only be understood through oral teachings and an oral system that will enable the most learned among you to derive from Torah law and the history of the precedents of ordinances, etc., how we follow Torah law in every age. And that's why when we light the Hanukkah candles in a story that happened after the Bible had been completed, not just the Torah, but the whole Bible had been completed, and we say that blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to light the Hanukkah lamps. That's not mentioned in the Bible. That's not mentioned in the Torah. And yet we say that God commanded us to light those lights. Why? Because God commanded us to heed our elders, our sages. And what are our sages? Our sages, our wise ones, our elders who we listen to are Talmidei Chachamim, right? A sage is a Talmid Chacham. He's a student of wisdom. Our wisest people are lifelong students who are always studying, always learning, always humble before God and the Torah, and very mindful of the fact that they may not impose some new rabbinic law by fiat, right? They may not impose some new rabbinic law because it sounds good to them and addresses, whatever is fashionable in society as an issue or value at that time. There haven't been any gezeras in a long time. There are shilas that are asked, questions that are asked of the Gedolim, of the great rabbis in any generation, that are going to be answered based on, thousands of years of precedence in the Talmud, etc. But it's all done very deliberately, and since it's sort of like a mountain of law, when that mountain grows, it's only millimeters. The tiniest fractions that it'll move forward. Now, that may be an important law that gets created or a precedent that gets created, but it's not like they just add laws that sound good to them. It's very, very difficult to make something new in halacha. Finally, Bill, but hold on, just because the worker wasn't hired in the presence of witnesses doesn't mean he cannot produce witnesses that he did the work. A man hires 10 laborers to do some work on his farm, and one of them later says he wasn't paid. Even if this one worker was hired apart from the other 9 surely saw him at work and saw him taking orders from the employer just like them. This is a fascinating situation. There's going to be more discussion about this. I haven't read ahead, but I kind of remember this from 14 years ago. What about that? What about that? The Migo argument, he could have said I never hired you, and therefore he's believed when he says I already paid you. And yet we also say that the employer can, be a little bit forgetful when he has a lot of workers working for him, which ones he paid or didn't pay. And as we've seen, the law and the Torah and the rabbis are very protective of the disenfranchised, right? Of the people who are less powerful. We're not going to favor the poor over the rich. But we're going to be very careful about workers whose livelihood is the work that they do each day. So I don't know the answer to your question yet, Bill, but let's put a pin in that and see what we learn tomorrow night, the day after that. Because I think we're going to get into it before we finish the tractate. And we're going to finish the tractate in 3 pages. As I recall, it's 49 pages, and then we'll make a siyum. 49? It's a very short final chapter. It's just like a page. Because, we finish on 49. My good friend Sal Goldner and Rabbi Manny Haznov, they made their siyum today. They finished yesterday. They had a little breakfast celebration today. So we have 46, 47, 40, and 49. And so we'll be making a siyum very soon, maybe Monday, maybe Tuesday. That's what I've got for us today. Please, God, everybody should have a refreshing, rejuvenating, uplifting Shabbos. We should go into it hearing only good news. We should come out of it hearing only good news. We should hear only good news on Shabbos. And I apologize that I wasn't prepared today. Hopefully I muddled through and we learned what we needed to learn. But we had a little crisis, a good kind of crisis this morning when our trailer dropped unexpectedly and Hollywood Reporter did an exclusive on it. So check that out. You can now just Google Guns N' Moses, and it'll take you right to the Hollywood Reporter article about it. And then the trailer just dropped. You can see the official trailer of Guns N' Moses. You can also see it at gunsandmosesmovie.com. All the best.